Tonight on Primetime, the war rages on. Washington says its military objectives have not expanded, even as the Pentagon warns Iran to expect a dramatic surge. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump says the United States should play a role in shaping Iran's future leadership. Deepening conflict and questions about what comes next. A warm welcome to Primetime. US officials say their objectives in the war with Iran have not expanded as the conflict enters its 7th day. But US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says firepower over Iran is about to surge dramatically. Well, at the same time, President Donald Trump says Washington wants a role in shaping Iran's future leadership.
The war between Iran, Israel and the United States entered its 7th day on Friday, with airstrikes, missile attacks and naval clashes continuing across the region. US President Donald Trump said in a phone interview with Reuters that Washington should have a role in choosing Iran's future leadership after the conflict. The comment raised questions about whether the United States was seeking regime change in Tehran. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth denied that the war's objectives had expanded.
Well, there's no expansion. Ultimately, I think the president's having a heck of a say in who runs Iran, given the ongoing operation we have. So there's no expansion in our objectives. We know exactly what we're trying to achieve.
At the same time, Israel says plans to remove Iran's leadership had been discussed months before the current conflict.
We were already in November when we sat with the Prime Minister in a very small forum, and the Prime Minister set a goal to eliminate the Khamenei regime in November.
Iran says at least 1,230 people have been killed since the start of the bombardment. Iranian media also reported missile strikes hitting buildings, including 2 schools in the town of Parand, southwest of Tehran. US officials are investigating whether American forces may have been responsible for an earlier strike on a girls' school in the southern city of Minab, where Iranian authorities say 165 students and staff were killed. Iran has responded with missile and drone attacks targeting Israel and Gulf states, including the United Arab Emirates, Qatar and Bahrain. A refinery in Bahrain caught fire after a missile strike, while Israel reported overnight missile and drone attacks near Tel Aviv. The conflict is also spreading beyond the main front lines. Lebanon's Hezbollah has warned Israeli residents to evacuate towns within 5 kilometers of the border after Israeli airstrikes prompted evacuations in parts of Beirut's southern suburbs.
Okay, let's bring in Orkan Amishov now, who's been closely following the latest developments in the war between the United States, Israel and Iran. With the conflict intensifying, questions are obviously growing about whether the campaign could eventually involve US boots on the ground. What consequences would there be for Washington and Tehran, and how the wider region might be affected? Orkan, very good to see you.
Very good to see you, Guy.
As always. President Trump wants a role then in deciding the future leader of Iran, but Iran looks like it's already decided it wants the son of the former supreme leader. How is this going to play out?
Yes, it is very clear that Mujtaba Ali Khamenei is the choice of the IRGC, and basically those people who are governing the affairs of the nation at this precise moment in time. And President Donald Trump said that he's not the right person. He's not the figure that we'll be happy with, and therefore actually there's no need to choose anybody, because we can actually exterminate those people. Something along those lines have been said by President Trump. I think it's a very clear indication that he wants to have a say about who's going to govern Iran, but it doesn't respond to the question whether what we call change of the system, is that going to happen or not. I think that I am still of the opinion that Americans do not have any plan for post-Islamic Republic in the first place. They don't have a contingency plan. I think their plan is based on their 2 fundamental precepts: debilitate their capabilities, dismantle IRGC, which is dispersed across the country, deprive them of their nuclear infrastructure, is if anything left of that infrastructure in the first place, destroy their ballistic ammunition and so forth. Basically, destroy everything humanly possible, naval force as well, and then Iranian people will probably take decisive measure and they will change the system there by overthrowing, toppling the current system. So basically we could reach a point when Iran is so debilitated that people are in a position to take decisive measure, but because they're not organized, and because not all Iranians who are currently in Iran actually in favor of toppling the system there, we could find ourselves in a situation of civil war, the failure of the central state and so forth.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Is that an obvious logical cause and effect? Because in many other countries that would be a reasonable assumption to make. But even if everything is so debilitated as you've described, does that necessarily mean that there will be an uprising of some kind?
It doesn't necessarily mean there will be uprising. It doesn't necessarily mean that the government there will be toppled, but it means that state will be so weakened that some of the groups in different parts of the country, in particular those parts of Iran which could be described as Western Iran, with Kurdish forces there in mind, receiving some support from the United States, could actually begin the new uprising against the government. It could create a Syria-like situation, not the complete replication of what we have seen in Syria, but something similar. Of course, Iran is far more resilient. Of course, IRGC is all over the place. Of course, we have got Basij, we've got the army, which is massive. And interestingly enough, up until now, and that is to the credit of the resilience of this Islamic Republic of Iran, we have seen no visible sign of defection to anywhere. They're still quite solid, they're still quite operational, but that does not necessarily mean that they will remain so until the end. This campaign will continue for weeks, for a couple of weeks. Americans they have to achieve their purposes. But the question there is that if they achieve their purposes, will that be satisfactory for Israelis? Because I think that from the very beginning there have been points of difference between those two allies. For US, important thing is to make sure Iran is not danger to US interests. For Israel, I think that something along the lines of the complete collapse of the Iranian state is far more interesting, because Israelis are probably driven by two considerations, exigencies. They want to make sure Iran is not able to threaten them, and plus, if Iran as a state collapses, its neighbors will deal with their consequences, not them. So it's a different way of looking at things. The countries in this region are looking at it from a probably more balanced point of view. They fully understand Iran could be a problematic country, but if you don't have a plan B for post-Islamic Republic of Iran, then you have to make sure you gauge your measures. And that's the reason why Gulf countries, and let me tell you one thing about the Gulf countries. I think worrying signal coming from there is that they're running out of interceptors, which means that Iran using its drones, the technology tactic known as drone swarms, would be able to overwhelm them, and US will not be able to be in a position to help those countries. And that's part of the Iranian, effectively, strategy. Iran is fighting asymmetric battle against its adversaries. Iran is absolutely confident that by means of creating a havoc and chaos in those countries will be forcing US to hold attack on Iran, and that's part of Iranian thinking, as I understand it.
Let's just have a look at what Mr. Hegseth said. Yeah. He said the objectives have not expanded, but firepower is yet to surge.
Yeah.
What's happening there? Contradictory statements, or is this consistent? How do you interpret it?
In terms of its fundamental parameters, US ambitions remain the self-same. Over the past couple of days, since last Saturday morning, since 28th of February, Iranian drone and ballistic missile attacks have declined by 75–80%. So they're actually running out of their resources, but simultaneously they may be preparing for another phase of this confrontation when they will be focusing on US assets in the Middle East in a completely different way by means of increasing the drone component, which is it's a very cost-effective aerial battle mechanism employed by Iran. Iran has been very good at that, by the way. They've been even helping Russians in the context of their war against Ukraine. This is one particular aspect. I think that, as I said while responding to the first inquiry of yours, Iran will be able to defend itself up to a point, and I think they will reach one stage where the differences between Israel and the United States will be so visible that some element of sort of rhetorical confrontation could be observed there as well. As I said earlier, for United States, Iran is not an existential danger in the first place. But both Israelis and US, they understand that this country at its weakest now, and if the problem's to be sorted out, let's sort it out now. And US will be happy with some sort of a not reformed, but revised version of this country, not necessarily complete reversal of the system there, but the Israelis will want more and more. And it will take a couple of weeks. But the problem there is that none of them are ready for the fallout scenario, because fallout scenario will be of such a nature that not Israel or United States will be dealing with its consequences, but Iran's immediate neighbors, including this region, by the way.
And do you think, it's very interesting that, because on the one hand, the munitions are clearly running very low.
Yeah.
On the other, you think drones might be part of a new strategy. Are the drones in sort of good order, but the missiles are running low?
You're running low, yes, of course. I'm not sure to what extent they will be able to replenish it. But what Americans and Israelis are doing, they're focusing on both missile launches, I suppose, in order to deprive them of opportunity to fire in the direction of Israel or US military assets across the Gulf region, and also on those drone points, they call it, I think, drone launch points as well. So they effectively, because they have complete domination of the Iranian airspace, they are in a very advantageous position. The future of the current system there does not look bright at all. Because the meaning of victory for them is a completely different thing as opposed to Israel and United States. They're fighting this asymmetric battle. They got a couple of tools at their disposal. They could create civilian damage, civilian casualties. They could organize terror attacks in different parts of the Middle East. For them, victory is about surviving. For US and Israel, it's about achieving their military objectives. But ultimately, let's see what happens inside Iran. For a couple of weeks they are bound to survive, because the other day one of the most recognized authors covering this Iranian subject said that back in 1989, when the first supreme leader died, everybody said the system is going to collapse, but the system did not collapse because it was never meant to be based on one person. Yes, indeed, there is a resilience. The recent development regarding Nakhchivan attack shows the extent to which the system there is apparently decentralized, in a sense that the president or foreign minister are not completely aware of what's happening on the battlefield and who's doing what and who's ordering what, whereas IRGC commanders, which I still believe are acting in a very centralized way in many ways, are able to take independent steps. So you're dealing with a different specimen, with a different political animal. They're not behaving, their notion of rationality is not the notion of rationality that you and I or many other people across the world would understand. Iranian people have been suffering economically, despite their enormous economic resources. But the Islamic Republic of Iran is not particularly concerned about it. Iran had fantastic opportunities to have constructive relations with its neighbors, with Azerbaijan, with Gulf countries. They're not doing that. They're not interested in that. It's a very different specimen. And if it's all about survival, they will be able to plod on for some considerable time. By considerable time, I mean a couple of weeks. But we'll see afterwards. I think Americans are not ready for any system change there. Israelis are not ready either. They don't have any plan. What they're going to do, they're going to put massive pressure on Iran, deprive it of all of its tools, which they believe threatening Israeli and US interests, but they will not be dealing with the consequences of it.
Yes.
President Donald Trump may say one day, well, we defeated, we achieved our purpose, Iran is no longer a threat to us, their ballistic infrastructure completely razed to the ground. It's up to Iranian people to decide their future. Because I'm absolutely sure, you earlier mentioned about ground invasion, with the possible exception of arming certain fractions, military groups inside the country and creating the fortuitous ground for civil war situation in Iran, there will be no direct ground sort of intervention, because you need to, ground invasion should be launched through neighboring countries. Turkey would not allow that. Azerbaijan will not allow that. Armenia will not allow that. Armenia, of course, naturally not in a position to decide upon these matters, but naturally it's completely unthinkable. Iraq will not allow that, and some other countries. So basically we have found ourselves in a position when the fate of the Iranian people ultimately will be decided by themselves under the circumstances of the complete collapse of the Iranian security apparatus, and we will have this sort of a fallout system, and it's incredibly dangerous because you find yourself in a position where there's no central government, you don't know who to speak to. I mean, I've seen a very good example of that in the case of the Nakhchivan strike. I mean, everybody there in Iran pleads ignorance. And then what sort of country is it? I mean, you can't talk to anybody about anything worthwhile. Of course, there is a degree of hypocrisy and shilly-shallying there, no doubt about that. But there's also a degree of some natural and genuine disconnect, I think.
Well, sometimes when a leader prosecutes a war overseas, he or she, after some time, is subject to intense pressure from the electorate at home and therefore wants to hurry up and get the job done. It doesn't look like Donald Trump is under huge pressure domestically.
No.
What does that speak to? What do you think then in terms of time frame? Do you think that 2 or 3 weeks will be the maximum? Will they then take a break and review and possibly come back? Or what's your sense of the sort of timescales?
On the basis of what happened in the House of Representatives just today, this war powers resolution failed to pass, with the Republicans managing to win that debate. I think it's got complete months or even 2 months in order to carry out this operation. A couple of factors could affect, of course, casualties, the public discontent and so forth, but those things are not happening. It's a relatively, it's not cost-effective war in many ways, but in terms of human casualties, they don't have ground invasion. US assets are being targeted, but you and I were discussing the total number of human casualties. They're told basically, as long as the Gulf region is concerned, that overall number is number 4 now, I think. 3 from United Arab Emirates, 1 from Bahrain. Well, of course, each is a tragedy, but ultimately it's not Iraq. It's not a ground invasion in Kosovo or in Iraq. So they will be able to carry on this principle. I think that basically Americans and Israelis have achieved their purposes for the time being. They are fully conscious of the resilience of the Islamic Republic of Iran, but they are not. They don't have plan for post-Islamic Republic, and I think they also don't have any tangible plan for the scenario in which Iran will retaliate beyond the ordinary, out of the ordinary, as we have seen in the case of Azerbaijan.
And just finally, let's just talk about Azerbaijan-Iran relations. Has anything changed in the last 24 hours? Has an apology been forthcoming? What does the mood music look like? Where are the bilateral relations at this point?
Iranians are not known for their immediate and imminent apologies. They did not apologize immediately after the attack on the Azerbaijani embassy in Tehran back in January 2023. Their technology is based on initially pleading ignorance, then prevaricating for some considerable time. But if they're forced, they will issue half apology, and then things may go in the right direction later. I don't see that happening. I mean, it's a very peculiar situation. I mean, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was talking to his Azerbaijani counterpart, said that he regrets what happened, but that drone attack did not emanate from Iranian territory. Probably, I mean, they always speculate about Israeli ploy, which is their usual tactic, and I'm not particularly surprised about that either. I think, I mean, we discussed it earlier. Either it is sheer incompetence, which is possible, or it is simply warning to Azerbaijan by IRGC elements without the Islamic Republic of Iran's political leadership having the courage to own the drone attack, which is very, very likely, and it's very typical of Iranian modus operandi. It's a time-honored modus operandi for Iran, as we have seen in the past, and that's practically it. I mean, one possible school of thought is that the system is decentralized, the foreign minister is not aware, and interim council members are not aware. But I think that they are aware, maybe disconnect exists, but it is the way they operate. It's sort of doing something which is malicious and then not accepting only what you're forced with some caveats, and similar pattern is observed. But President Aliyev was very clear about that. I think that he defined it as an act of terror. Legally, I mean, this is, of course, violation of Azerbaijani sovereignty. And there are 3 categories there: illegal use of force, armed attack and aggression. I think on the basis, we're looking at these things from the legal point of view on the basis of scale, scale of damage, intent and state attribution. So they will be playing on the state attribution. They will say that, well, they may emanate from our territory, but it's not coming from Iranian state institutions. It could be some kind of a Mossad undercovers arranging it. I think this is for the birds, and we should not entertain such a audacious sort of outlandish conjecture. But reality is that it at least illegal use of force against Azerbaijan, and of course it's a terror attack, as President Aliyev said.
Orkan, I know you're going to stay with us just for a couple of minutes. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis, as
Thank you.
always.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Okay, as the war intensifies, attention then is also turning to Tehran's growing partnership with Moscow. According to the Washington Post, US officials believe Russia has provided Iran with intelligence that could help Tehran target American military bases in the region. Now, the development highlights the increasingly close military and strategic cooperation between Moscow and Tehran as the conflict widens. Well, joining us now to discuss this is Dmitry Bridza, expert at the Russian International Affairs Council, political analyst. He is joining us from Moscow. Mr. Bridza, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Prime Time. We appreciate it very much indeed.
Good evening, thank you very much.
Let's dive into this then. How serious, how credible do you think these reports are of Russian-Iranian intelligence cooperation at such a critical moment?
I think, in my opinion, is a report to blame Russia. I don't think Russia will be part of this war in the Middle East. It's not in the interest of Russia. But we see, of course, the position of Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and especially Sergei Lavrov. He said that what's doing the United States of America against Iran is aggression against a sovereign state that is a member of United Nations. But as we know that after 2022, after what's called in Russia the special operation, the relationship between Russia and Iran is becoming better. It's becoming more stronger than it was before, because Russia needs Iran in different levels for trading strategies, for trading routes, for even exchanging the knowledge of using drones, and also for let's say kind of exchange in the experience of combat war. So because we know that Russia now, the priority of Russian Federation is the Ukrainian war, not the situation in the Middle East. But I think that Russia will try to be far away from the conflict. It will work mostly on the diplomatic level, because the Russian President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin said about it that Russia could be part of any negotiations and could be kind of mediator between the Iran and the United States of America. And it could be also beneficial for Russia in any negotiations for resolution of the Ukrainian crisis with the United States of America, because yes, of course, now the negotiations that happened in Abu Dhabi didn't get any result. But I think that Russia now could be part of any solutions in the Middle East or negotiations, in order to get benefit from these negotiations between the United States of America and Iran on the nuclear project, to also get benefits from these negotiations to make this, to use it in any negotiations afterwards about Ukraine.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you've just said. The fact that Russia, as you put it, need Iran, and specifically in the area of drone warfare, drone technology. Given that Iran is facing such an onslaught, and they're engaged in an awful lot of sort of sending drones to Gulf countries, what is it you think Russia could give to Iran in return for their help?
I think it could be indirect support, military support, but not official one. I don't think Russia, as I said, will be involved in any conflict in Middle East because, as we know, this it's 100 years before when the relationship between the Russia and the Saudi Arabia started. So I don't think Russia will damage its relationship with the Gulf countries, especially with the United Arab Emirates and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, because Putin understands very well that this relationship are very important for Russian economy, especially the relationship with the United Arab Emirates, of course. So I think that it could be that will support, as I said, Iran on the diplomatic level. And we see how the Russian media is talking now against the US policies in the region, against the military operation of the United States of America and Israel against Iran. And they see it as aggression. They see it as a dangerous movement from the US President Donald Trump. So I think that mainly Russia will work on this level, on the level, and to be part of any negotiations in the future, because if we understand very well any political change in Iran will damage both Russia and China, because we're talking about trading routes, we're talking about strategic interest in Russia, of Russia in the Central Asian countries, and also in South Caucasus region. So any changes in the political regime, and we understand that the United States of America, they want a new political regime that will be more closer to the United States of America and Israel. And in this way, it loses like a partner. And now we understand very well that Iran is a part of Russian Federation. They cooperate on different levels. So if Russia will lose Iran, it will be very dangerous for Russia in the region. And it will make the United States of America more powerful in the region, more closer to the Russian borders, and it could damage Russia from inside, because after Iran, I think the United States of America will try to have the new Middle East in order to make Israel be part of changes in the Middle East, of course, to protect the national sovereignty of Israel, and to make more countries, especially more Arab countries, engaged in the Abrahamic courts, because it's in the interest of the administration of Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you say there. So, I mean, in terms of Russia, clearly, judging on your analysis, has a very strong desire to ensure that the US goal of regime change in Iran does not happen. What sort of tools and techniques behind the scenes do you think Russia will employ to make sure that that goal is unsuccessful?
I'm not sure what kind of tools Russia could use, because we understand even in Russia in the past supported, for example, Assad regime in Syria, and Assad regime in the end collapsed because of the problems inside Syria, economical problems, political problems, and in the end Russia couldn't support Assad regime in the last 3-4 months because after or before the operation of the Syrian opposition. Of course, Iran is totally different situation. It's not like Syria, or it's not like Iraq or Libya with the case of the Muammar Gaddafi regime. Iran is more complex country. We know that inside Iran there is Iran faced many problems, economical problems. Also, there is problem with Ahwaz, Arabs that lives in Ahwaz. Also, problems with Kurds inside the country, and also the economical situation is difficult in Iran. I don't think Russia could be engaged in any, let's say, a war inside.
No, not a direct war.
Way.
Sorry to interrupt you. Not a direct war, but as you say, there's clearly got to be something. If Russia have a strong need, as you say, for Iran to help them, and then Iran would logically say to Russia, well, great, we would like something from you in return. What form do you think that would take? I mean, Russia's a very powerful country. It has a track record of all sorts of activities, across the world. What specific help do you think Russia could provide to Iran? Because obviously diplomacy, but any country could help with diplomacy. What is it that Russia's particularly good at that it could aid Iran with right now?
I think a kind of consultation on the military level. I think that's will be enough for Iran in this like level of the conflict in the Middle East, because Iran needs Russian experience, and we know that Russian experience in the war, especially the war in Chechnya, after that war in Afghanistan and Syria, it could be beneficial for Iran in this let's say level of conflict and the escalation in the Middle East. So I think that will be enough for Iran in this level, and it could be even indirect support on some military level. We're talking about military strategies, or it could be also supporting the Iranian economy in different levels, because, as I said, after 2022, the tradings is in a very high level now between Russia and Iran. So, as I said, also that Russia needs Iran for for economy, for Russian economy, and also because of the Iranian drones that are very beneficial in the Russian use, and especially for the Russian army.
But let's just talk about that a bit more. Just explain the context for our viewers, Dmitry, if that's okay, because it's a very interesting area. So the Ukraine war helping to shape Russia's support for Iran then. Just take us through how that dynamic unfolds.
Yeah, of course. The situation in Ukraine is also shaping of course, the Russian foreign policies, because right now we saw how the Russian Federation tried to be part of negotiations in Abu Dhabi, but it failed. I think that after some period of time, the Russian-US relationship could be established again, as it was before the conflict, if the Ukrainian crisis will find resolutions. If the Ukrainian crisis will end, then we could find that the US-Russian relationship could be like better than we see it right now. But of course, the Iranian case also it could make problems for to reestablish relationship between Russian Federation and the United States of America, because now we see that the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and even the position of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, that is condemning the US operation against Iran and saying it's aggression against a sovereign country that's part of a member of the United Nations. So I don't think right now in this year, and especially after the conflict, the escalation in the Middle East, we will see any better, let's say, or any resolutions or any reestablishment of the US-Russian relationship, because this year, I think that even we want solutions for the Ukrainian crisis, I think until the end of the year, after the escalation in the Middle East, it could be that there will be United Arab Emirates or other countries will hold new negotiations for peace in Ukraine.
Okay, Dmitry, we appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much for joining us from Moscow.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Andy Mioch. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Primetime. Andy Mioch has arrived in the studio to bring us the very latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, energy prices are surging following a dramatic warning from Qatar. Shipping remains disrupted due to the Middle East conflict. Indians were cleared by the Americans to import some Russian oil, and there's some news out of the gold mining sector out of Ghana. So let's have a look. First up, oil prices are on track for their biggest weekly gain in years. Energy prices went up following a warning from Qatar that Gulf energy exporters would shut down production within days.
Oil prices surged Friday after Qatar's energy minister said the Middle East war could result in Gulf exporters halting shipments in days. Saad Al-Kaabi told the Financial Times that the war could lead to Gulf exporters stopping shipments within days, and that crude prices could reach $150 a barrel in the coming weeks if oil tankers were unable to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Global benchmark Brent crude futures added 4.5% to trade at $89.2 a barrel by 6:58 a.m. Eastern Time, in a fresh 52-week high and levels not seen in nearly 2 years. The spike comes as the US-Iran conflict spreads across the Middle East, disrupting energy production and bringing traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping route, to a near standstill. Crude prices are on track for their biggest weekly gain since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in early 2022.
As millions of barrels of oil and gas are stuck near the Strait of Hormuz, the US government has temporarily eased sanctions to allow India to buy Russian oil currently stranded at sea.
The US Treasury Department issued a 30-day waiver on Thursday, allowing India to buy Russian oil currently stuck at sea. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said in a statement posted on X, the waiver was issued to enable oil to keep flowing into the global market. He said that the measure will not provide significant financial benefit to the Russian government, as it only authorizes transactions involving oil already stranded at sea. Bessent called it a stopgap measure, as Washington expects India to eventually buy more US oil. India is vulnerable to energy supply shocks, with crude stocks covering only about 25 days of demand. India gets about 40% of its oil imports from the Middle East through the Strait of Hormuz.
Still with Iran conflict-related news, Maersk, one of the world's biggest container shipping groups, said it has temporarily suspended 2 services linking the Middle East to Asia and Europe.
Maersk, one of the world's biggest container shipping groups, said on Friday it has temporarily suspended 2 services linking the Middle East to Asia and Europe. It's as the Iran conflict continues to disrupt global supply chains. The Danish group said in a statement it would halt its FM1 service connecting the Far East to the Middle East, as well as its ME11 service linking the Middle East to Europe. Tensions in the region have escalated sharply after the United States and Israel launched their most ambitious attacks on Iran in decades. Iran has responded with retaliatory strikes across the Gulf. The crisis has left 147 container ships sheltering in the region. It's also triggered port congestion and freight rate increases. They are reportedly rippling across global supply chains from Asia to Europe.
The Pentagon slapped a formal supply chain risk designation on artificial intelligence lab Anthropic, limiting use of a technology that a source told Reuters was being used for military operations in Iran.
The Pentagon formally labeled AI lab Anthropic a supply chain risk on Thursday. It limited the use of a technology a source said was being used for military operations in Iran. This risk designation, confirmed by an Anthropic statement, is effective immediately and bars government contractors from using the AI lab's technology in their work for the US military. But CEO Dario Amodei said the designation has a narrow scope, and a restriction only applies for the AI technology's use in Pentagon contracts. He added in a statement that companies can still use Anthropic's chatbot Claude in other projects unrelated to the Pentagon. This formal label follows a months-long dispute over the company's insistence on safeguards that the Defense Department said went too far. Amodei said the 2 sides have talked about how Anthropic might still work with the military without dismantling these safeguards. He reiterated that Anthropic would challenge this designation in court. The action represented an extraordinary rebuke by the US against an American tech company that was earlier than its rivals to work with the Pentagon.
In an unusually high-level response to a fiscal proposal, China, US, and several other Western governments are pressuring Ghana to halt a gold royalty hike, Reuters reported, citing industry sources. Africa's largest gold producer is changing the rate in an effort to capture more revenue from the precious metals' record-breaking run.
China, the US and other Western governments have mounted an unusually coordinated push to get Ghana to halt a gold royalty hike. They say could harm some of the world's biggest miners, according to 3 sources with knowledge of the matter and a letter from an industry body. Africa's largest gold producer wants to replace its fixed 5% royalty with a sliding scale between 5% and 12%, linked to bullion prices as part of an effort to capture more revenue from gold's run to successive historic highs. Miners said the upper bands of the new regime would make Ghana one of the continent's most expensive jurisdictions and could squeeze margins. Ghana has agreed to cut an existing levy to ease passage of the reform, Reuters has reported, but mining companies say the proposed scale remains too aggressive and have submitted lower counter rates. Global mining CEOs have also privately pushed back. Leaders of Newmont, Gold Fields, Anglo Gold Ashanti and Perseus wrote or delivered concerns directly to the lands minister in December and January. Chinese-owned mines, including Zijin, Chifeng and Shandong Gold, have filed formal protests. Ghana-linked producers have posted strong 2025 results, with Newmont earning over $7 billion, Goldfields more than doubling and Anglo Gold Ashanti tripling profit, and Perseus making $421.7 million, up 16% year-on-year.
And finally, in AI chips news, NVIDIA has stopped production of its second most advanced artificial intelligence chips, known as H200 chips, intended for the Chinese market, according to a report by the Financial Times.
NVIDIA has reportedly stopped production of its second most advanced artificial intelligence chips, known as H200 chips, intended for the Chinese market. The Financial Times reported the update on Thursday, citing 2 people with knowledge of the situation. The report said the US chipmaker has reallocated manufacturing capacity at chip contract maker TSMC away from making H200 chips to its next-generation Vera Rubin hardware. Reuters could not immediately verify the report. NVIDIA and TSMC did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Last week, NVIDIA said it had received licenses from the US government to ship small amounts of its H200 chips to customers in China. However, this move suggests NVIDIA does not expect any meaningful H200 sales in China in the near term. In January, US President Donald Trump's administration gave a formal green light to China-bound sales of NVIDIA's H200 chips, but shipments remained stalled due to guardrails built into the process.
And that will be all in the business brief for tonight. Handing it back to you, Guy.
Great stuff, Andy. Thanks very much indeed. After the break, France moves to reinforce Lebanon as President Emmanuel Macron pledges military and humanitarian support while urging all sides to avoid dragging the country deeper into the Middle East war. Stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Apologies for 1 or 2 technical difficulties we were having just before the break. Let's carry on now with this very interesting story. France is stepping up its involvement as tensions in Lebanon rise amid the wider Middle East conflict. Now, President Emmanuel Macron has announced new military and humanitarian support for the Lebanese army, including armoured transport vehicles and emergency aid for displaced civilians. Paris is also urging all sides, Israel, Iran and Hezbollah, to avoid widening the conflict into Lebanon. Well, joining us to discuss this, as you can see, is our very own Katie Wilson. Katie, thanks very much for coming in. What's behind this decision by Macron then to send the military aid in?
Well, as you mentioned, it's essentially about not involving Lebanon in this wider conflict. So we're already seeing airstrikes and mass evacuations around Beirut and in southern Lebanon, which is raising fears that Lebanon could become a major front in this wider conflict. Now, if you're wondering what Lebanon has to do with Israel and Iran, we've got that Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah in Lebanon, and obviously there has been that ongoing conflict between Israel and Hezbollah since 2022. So Macron has said that Lebanon is at a moment of great danger, and he's urging both Hezbollah and Israel to halt attacks whilst announcing this support for the Lebanese army. So what we know so far about Macron's decision is that he's sending equipment such as armoured transport vehicles and logistical support to the Lebanese armed forces. France is hoping that that's going to reinforce the national army so simply it can maintain stability and avoid a security vacuum that militant groups might exploit in Lebanon. Of course, this is part of a broader Western strategy to strengthen those official state institutions, particularly in areas where Hezbollah has historically been the dominant armed actor. So for Macron and for the West more broadly, this is about supporting Lebanon's government as it tries to reassert control over these armed groups. The Lebanese authorities have signalled they want the national army to take responsibility for security across the country, including those areas where Hezbollah have been active. Macron has indicated that Lebanon's leadership has committed to expanding the army's role and restoring state control over territory. And obviously providing this military equipment will help the Lebanese army do that, but it also reinforces the idea that the state, not these Iran-backed proxies like Hezbollah, should hold the monopoly and the authority on force.
Yeah, it's been a very difficult job, I think, for the Lebanese government. It's a very complex country, quite difficult to understand all the nuances and complexities. What is actually the state of play on the ground in Lebanon right now?
Right now, the situation is extremely volatile and it's changing very quickly. Hour by hour, it's changing. And of course, that's due to that intensifying fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. The country has effectively become one of the main flashpoints in this widening regional conflict. And obviously, we've seen in recent days Hezbollah's fired rockets and drones across the border into northern Israel, saying it's acting in support of Iran after the killing of Iran's supreme leader. And Israel has responded with large-scale airstrikes across Lebanon, including strikes in Beirut's southern suburbs, an area known as a Hezbollah stronghold. Now, these strikes have been significant. Israeli forces have hit dozens of targets across the country and issued mass evacuation warnings for southern Lebanon and part of Beirut, which they've told residents to leave immediately ahead of possible strikes, and that's triggered panic and gridlock in the capital as people try to flee. I don't know if you remember those pictures as well of the chaotic traffic jams across Lebanon as people responded to these warnings. So along the southern border, that's where we're seeing the most tense situation. There's reports even of Israeli ground operations, according to the UN, and ongoing exchanges of fire with Hezbollah fighters. And for civilians, the humanitarian situation is deteriorating rapidly as well. Tens of thousands of people have already been displaced, as we saw in those pictures, with many moving north or sheltering in schools or public buildings. The United Nations describes the broader regional situation as a major humanitarian emergency, with roughly 100,000 people displaced in Lebanon alone. And groups are warning that this comes at a time when Lebanon was already under huge strain, even before this escalation, with a deep economic crisis, political paralysis, and a fragile state. So the sudden displacement of these large numbers of people is putting additional pressure on these already overstretched infrastructure, including hospitals, water systems, and shelters.
And how much of this from Macron do you think is just practical humanitarian support? And how much is a sort of a political, symbolic move, do you think, by the French president?
Well, it is a bit of both. On one level, of course, this is symbolically important political backing from France, and these additional vehicles, logistical equipment and training from France, yes, they're going to certainly help the army maintain a visible presence. In sensitive area, maybe border monitoring is where we're going to see that presence. But in practical terms, is it going to transform the military balance between the Lebanese army and heavily armed groups like Hezbollah? No, it's not. And the Lebanese armed forces have long suffered chronic underfunding, aging equipment, and that wider collapse of Lebanon's economy. So this is a drop in the ocean, and Hezbollah remains far more heavily harmed and battle-hardened after years of involvement in these regional conflict, and it possesses advanced weapon systems that the Lebanese state simply doesn't have. But at the same time, Western military assistance is carefully calibrated, so this wasn't an accident from Macron. It's designed to support the Lebanese army without turning it into a force that could directly challenge Hezbollah, which of course would risk destabilising the country even further. So there is that balancing act there when it comes to providing military aid. And of course that is where the conversation about political symbolism comes in. France's move signals that international backing for Lebanon's official institutions. It's a time when the state is under immense pressure. So by strengthening that national army, even if it is just symbolically, Paris and its partners are trying to reinforce the idea that security in Lebanon should be something for the state to deal with rather than these militias, particularly Iran-backed militias. So it is important to mention, of course, there is that historical relationship between France and Lebanon.
Yes.
Yeah, Paris has traditionally seen itself as one of Beirut's closest Western partners, and the ties date back to the early 20th century when Lebanon was under a French mandate. So it's almost like a post-colonial relationship that's evolved here, and that has transformed into sustained political engagement, humanitarian support, and of course that security cooperation that we're seeing now.
Yes. And Katie, you mentioned Paris and her partners there. Is France acting alone, or are there other actors involved in this?
So France has definitely taken the lead role here, but it's not in complete isolation. So as I mentioned, due to those historic ties, Paris has the political leverage, the diplomatic relations to be able to intervene quickly. So that is why we're seeing this military aid announcement almost immediately. But that said, of course, there's broader international interest in supporting Lebanon, particularly from Western and European partners who are concerned about the country descending further into instability. So countries like the US and members of the EU, they've emphasised the importance of strengthening the Lebanese armed forces. But again, it's through not necessarily by sending military equipment, but through training, financial support and logistical assistance. And these efforts, as I say, tend to be quite cautious because of that risk of provoking Hezbollah to retaliate or escalating that regional conflict. So the French aid package that we're looking at now, it's including armoured transport vehicles, logistical support. It's actually a lot more tangible and immediate than what other countries are providing, but of course it's due to that balancing act and those historic ties that means France is able to act that bit quicker.
Yeah, and talking of those historic ties, Katie, some of the countries that in the past had been occupied colonies of France are still, I think, angry about the past and treatment that they've received from France. Lebanon, though, it's a little bit more nuanced. There seems to be a way of working together. Do you think this is going to lead to a deeper French role in Lebanese society? And how uncomfortable might the Lebanese be about that, given the history?
So I think there's a potential for that to happen, but it's all going to depend on how the situation unfolds on the ground. So as you mentioned, there is that historical relationship between these two countries, and that legacy has created a long-standing diplomatic, political and military ties. So the decision from Macron to provide this aid is actually in line with tradition, we can say. We were kind of expecting Macron to be the first to move on this. And if you think back to other Lebanese crises like the port explosion, France were one of the first countries, and France has often acted as a mediator in these Lebanese crises. So France is still playing quite an important role, I think, especially since the economic situation is so volatile. But equally, this situation is unprecedented, and the state institutions in Lebanon, they're under unprecedented stress. You know, there was economic collapse already, and now we're looking at an escalating regional conflict. So by stepping in quickly, you're right, France is asserting itself not just as a diplomatic player, but as a practical supporter of Lebanon's state authority. So it could translate into more sustained military cooperation, such as expanded training programs, increased provision of equipment, or even intelligence sharing and closer coordination with the Lebanese armed forces. So France may aim to strengthen the National Army as a stabilising force, but it's more to prevent Hezbollah or other militias from filling the security vacuum, as if that's what we see as this conflict continues. And of course, it's also protecting European interests in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Katie, fascinating stuff. Thank you, as always, for your analysis. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at China's diplomatic push to calm tensions in the Middle East as Beijing sends a special envoy to encourage dialogue and prevent further escalation. Do stay with us. A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Well, as the war in the Middle East continues to rage for a week, China is making efforts to de-escalate tensions by sending its special envoy for Middle East affairs, Zai Jun, to encourage dialogue. Our correspondent in Beijing has more.
China said it will send its special envoy for Middle East affairs, Zai Jun, to the region to help push for de-escalation as tensions continue to rise following recent military actions and security incidents in the Middle East. China's foreign ministry said that the envoy will visit relevant countries and stay in close communication with all sides to encourage dialogue and prevent the situation from worsening. Beijing has repeatedly called for calm and restraint, warning that further military escalation could destabilize the region and affect global security and energy markets. Chinese officials say the priority should be easing tensions and returning to dialogue and political solutions rather than military confrontation. According to the foreign ministry, Zai Jun will meet officials and regional stakeholders during the visit as part of China's efforts to encourage communication between the parties involved. Zai has served as China's special envoy for Middle East affairs since 2019 and has previously held talks with officials across the region during past crises, promoting ceasefires and political dialogue. China says his trip aims to help reduce tensions and support stability in the region. Manu Maftoum, A News, Beijing.
Well, as the war in the Middle East enters its second week, China is stepping up diplomatic efforts to prevent further escalation. Beijing says it is sending its special envoy for the Middle East affairs, as we just heard, to encourage dialogue and push for de-escalation. Chinese officials warn that continued military confrontation could destabilize the region and disrupt global energy markets. Well, joining us now to discuss all of this is Anna Evans, the political analyst. She's going to discuss with us what role China might play in easing tensions. Anna, very nice indeed to see you. Thanks for joining us on Primetime.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's look at this. And how significant is China's decision then to send this Middle East envoy, and particularly to send the envoy now?
Well, it is obviously very, very significant because this is a conflict that has great impact on China. And China waited to see how Iran would react to the attacks and to see how the situation would evolve. And this is a typical Chinese modus operandi. So China, the government, they don't want to move immediately and jump in a situation without first waiting and seeing where it goes and what the chances are that the conflict will resolve by itself. But having seen that the escalation was much more propagated and the retaliation by Iran was much, much more intense and comprehensive than anyone expected, now China has reasoned that this situation is becoming so dangerous for its own economic well-being, that it can't wait any longer. So this is a tremendous sign that this war is ultimately hitting China, and the US is showing China it is still the great power with the capacity, to have a long distance, long range hand, and to really cause disruption that hits China.
Yeah, it's very interesting the way that you describe the pacing, the timing of this intervention as being very typical of China. Do you think there's a pattern here of Beijing trying to position themselves as a mediator on the global stage?
Oh yes, undoubtedly. So China is using this opportunity to show that, in addition to Russia, it is the last big country that talks to Iran. And also China is showing that it is in a position to mediate between Iran and the Gulf Arab countries. And obviously we know that China has invested massively in both in Iran and in Arab Gulf economies. And also, 80% of Iranian oil goes to China, and in total, between Iran and the Arab Gulf countries, China imports 50% of its oil from the region. And so a closure of the Hormuz Strait will inevitably hit China in a major way. China is a big, it's a major global oil consumer. It still relies a lot on oil, notwithstanding its efforts to move into other sources of energy. But China is far away from self-sufficiency, and its economy is not thriving. On the contrary, its economy has somehow stagnated. And so, having a problem that, will cause higher prices, inflation, even though China has oil reserves for around 4 months ahead. But, as time goes by, each day that passes, the cost will be higher. And in a country whose economic situation is not famous, this is not very good news. So yes, again, signaling the importance of the matter by sending a special envoy now.
Yeah, given all that you've just described, how worried is Beijing then about the impact of this war, particularly on energy markets? I mean, 4 months supply, difficult conditions at home. Would you say that they're pretty concerned?
Oh, indeed. China is indeed concerned. And if we go back a little bit in time, we remember that when President Trump decided to pursue his MAGA rhetoric and impose tariffs on China and elsewhere, we remember that China retaliated very silently by restricting exports of some rare earths that were essential for the US defense industry. Now, what the US is now doing is paying off, in a similar coin, but using oil. So basically, the US is showing China that it has a very long military arm, that its military arm can reach a choke point of a critical material for China, which is oil and also natural gas, because liquid natural gas, 1/3 of it passes by the Strait of Hormuz towards China. And so this is a really heavy price to pay, maybe not in a week's period, but as time goes by, the price will get higher and higher, and China will see itself forced to look for alternatives, which will be certainly more costly. So it is inevitably quite worried because it has seen the long arm of the US. Furthermore, there is a lot of discussion about, how much Chinese defense systems Iran is using, and if it is using Chinese defense systems, it looks like the Chinese defense systems are not working properly because the US and Israel are being able to hit their targets, without much trouble. And so that's also not very good news for China in terms of military projection.
Anna, let's just delve into a little bit more detail on this question of leverage, if we can. We understand the China, Iran, Russia triangle, so to speak. As you've already pointed out, China can talk to Iran, one of the few countries left that can. But what about leverage with Washington? We always hear from Mr. Trump that he has great relations with China. What leverage has Beijing got with the world's biggest military force?
Well, there is a trip and a meeting planned between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. President Trump, of course, has understood, from his trade war initiatives, that China is really a heavyweight in economic terms at the international level. And so there is this policy that the two great powers have forcefully to talk to each other. It's not possible not to talk to each other. But having said that, the US has been extremely concerned with China's ascent. For those of us who study international relations, we know from the Peloponnesian War in Greece, thousands of years ago, that a great power is always extremely concerned about an ascending power. And that's how the US feels towards China. So I would say that China wants to portray itself as a mediator between countries where it has invested so much and for whom China is a major purchaser, namely the Arab Gulf countries and Iran. But vis-à-vis the US, these are two powers that are the great rivals at the world stage. And so with regard to the US, China has quite a different position. In fact, the US is using this conflict as a weapon, ultimately, that hits China.
Yes.
And so that's a very different position from being a mediator as it is with regard to the Arab countries.
Very interesting, Anna. Just finally, with all that in mind, given let's assume that is correct, that at least part of the aim of this is to hurt China. Where does that leave China in terms of its position as a mediator, trying to de-escalate? China's a very realistic actor. What does it think is realistic in terms of containing, de-escalating this crisis?
Well, China is a very realistic actor, very pragmatic, and so is the United States. And so, pundits tend to criticize President Trump for his transactional approaches to foreign policy. But the fact is that if we look into China's, last 2 decades of investments all over the world and creation of transport and logistical routes all over the world, and its dominion on critical materials and rare earths, the critical minerals, the rare earths, the transports, the logistics, the refining, the selling. If we see this, we see that actually what President Trump has been doing is somehow mirroring China's very transactional approach, because that is how China, has conducted foreign policy. And so we know that Russia is still, a pillar to which, on which China can rely in a time of crisis like this. And so obviously the alliance of convenience can be strengthened at a time when China is feeling rather threatened, in the in a midterm, perspective. But China is really transactional, very pragmatic. And so its position here is, okay, we have invested so much money in this region. Let's now take advantage of what we already have invested and see if we can establish bridges here where no one else can. And that's basically the fact. China, at this point, is the only actor on speaking terms with Iran, and in addition to Russia. But Russia is entangled in Ukraine with a lot of the West against that war. And so it's a natural place for China at this point.
Yes, establish bridges where no one else can. Very interesting indeed. Anna, always great to have you on A News. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, after the break, Azerbaijan evacuates diplomatic staff from Iran following a reported drone strike as Baku strengthens security and awaits the results of Tehran's investigation. Stay with us. A warm welcome back to Primetime, wherever you're watching. Now, Azerbaijan will evacuate staff from its embassy in Tehran and its consulate in Tabriz. Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov said the decision was taken on the instructions of President Ilham Aliyev.
Azerbaijan is withdrawing its entire diplomatic staff from Iran following the drone attack on the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic. Azerbaijan's Foreign Minister, Ceyhun Bayramov, announced the decision during a press briefing in Baku, alongside Moldova's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mihai Popshoy.
Instructions have been issued for the evacuation of the staff of both our embassy in Tehran and our Consulate General in Tabriz from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And these instructions are currently being implemented. Given all these developments, we clearly cannot place the lives of our people at risk. From this point forward, the situation will, of course, be closely monitored. Naturally, we will await the outcome of the investigation promised by the Iranian side, and depending on its results, further decisions will be taken by our side.
At the same press conference, Moldova's Foreign Minister Mihai Popshoy condemned the drone strikes.
In light of the recent attacks on civilian infrastructure in the autonomous Nakhchivan Republic of Azerbaijan, Moldova firmly condemns the targeting of civilian facilities and the injuries inflicted upon civilians. We stand in full solidarity with the people of Azerbaijan and reiterate our unwavering support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan.
Support also came from Pakistan. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif called Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. Sharif condemned Iran's military attack, stating that Pakistan's state and army stand with Azerbaijan in these difficult days. Azerbaijan's Prime Minister Ali Asadov also held a telephone conversation with Turkey's Vice President Cevdet Yilmaz. During the call, the Azerbaijani side expressed strong protest over the drone attacks carried out from Iran, stating that the strikes violate the norms and principles of international law. The officials also highlighted that President Recep Tayyip Erdogan immediately called President Ilham Aliyev after the attack, expressing support for the Azerbaijani people. Prime Minister Asadov also thanked Turkey for its prompt assistance in organizing temporary flights to Igdir Airport to ensure safe air traffic to Nakhchivan amid the current situation. The diplomatic move follows the drone attacks on Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic on March 5th. 4 civilians were injured in the airport attack.
Evacuations from Iran are continuing through Azerbaijan as foreign nationals leave the country amid heightened regional tensions. The Astara state border checkpoint has become a key exit route, with hundreds of people from dozens of countries crossing into Azerbaijan in recent days. Our very own Chimnaz Shala reports now.
Evacuations from Iran through the Astara state border checkpoint are continuing. Most recently, 24 Chinese citizens were evacuated from Iran to Azerbaijan through the Astara crossing. Two citizens of the United Arab Emirates have also crossed the border through this checkpoint. During the night, representatives of the United Nations Department of Safety and Security were also evacuated. In total, 15 UN staff members entered Azerbaijan. Earlier, Italy's embassy in Iran evacuated 45 member staff through the Astara. Overall, more than 1,300 people have now been evacuated from Iran through the Astara following US and Israel military operations on February 28. The evacuees represent 45 countries. Here in Astara, the checkpoint has become a key route for people leaving Iran. We remain here at the Astara crossing, continuing to follow the evacuation process. I'm Chimnaz Shahlar with Nijat Gasimov for A News.
Well, Azerbaijan is taking precautionary steps amid rising regional tensions. Authorities say staff from the country's embassy in Tehran and its consulate in Tabriz will be evacuated after a reported drone strike, with Baku seeking explanations from Iran while monitoring the situation closely. Well, joining us now is Mohammed Mamedov, Research Fellow at the Topchub Asaf Center in Baku, and we're going to discuss what this means for Azerbaijan-Iran relations and regional security. Mohammed, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Prime Time. We appreciate you being with us. We've seen not just Azerbaijan, but many countries all around the world condemning the terrorist attack that we saw in Nakhchivan. But what prompted Azerbaijan to evacuate diplomatic staff from Iran at precisely this moment?
Well, thank you. I think in the beginning I have to mention that this must be closely related to what President Aliyev said in the meeting of the Security Council, that Azerbaijan will take certain retaliatory measures. I think this is just the beginning, the first step. And now Azerbaijani diplomatic staff, both from Tehran and Tabriz, are being withdrawn. And at the same time, I think not less important is Azerbaijani cabinet of ministers today adopted a decision to suspend the cargo transit from Azerbaijan coming from Iran and vice versa. This is very consequential also because it's also about transit of cargo. That means that Iran's export to Russia will also be affected, and taking into account that right now Tehran is under harsh sanctions from the United States and the broader Western camp, it means that it will lose a very vital trade access to the outside world. So in that regard, I think what is right now most important for Baku is finding a fine balance between signaling deterrence and strength, while at the same time avoiding being sucked into a broader war in the Gulf. So I think this is this step, both stopping cargo transit and at the same time diplomatic withdrawal, it sits between those, let's say, two fringe scenarios.
The response by President Aliyev was very strong indeed, as expected. Also the response from other countries around the world, a huge number: Turkey, Britain, the Gulf states, the EU, an enormous list of countries all coming out to condemn the action. Do you think to some degree Iran has been surprised by this sort of global condemnation of their actions?
Yeah, definitely, because this war is not only about the battlefield, it's also going on the diplomatic field. So we see that Iran is trying to reach out to the both countries in the Gulf region, especially the ones he has been attacking since the first day of the war, and at the same time different countries, like let's say big players such as Russia, China, who also suggested their mediation services. So Iran tries to, let's say, absorb the attacks from Israel and the United States, try to survive on the battlefield, while at the same time trying to reach out to different, let's say, world community to justify, let's say, its measures taken on the battlefield. So in the diplomatic field, I think Azerbaijan proved quite successful so far. As you said, from countries from different camps, different parts of the world supported, and wrote messages and declared their support to Azerbaijan's cause. So I think right now, amid this escalation, this is a very big win so far, the hope is that it will not escalate further.
And in terms of the sequencing of next steps, we know, as you say, that retaliatory action will certainly be taken. We're not quite sure in exactly what form, although we may have seen the first step, as you say. Will diplomacy in the conventional sense be suspended until that retaliatory action has taken place, or will the two sort of work in concert?
I think for now, diplomacy is the best course. Why? Because, I mean, Azerbaijani side, there is surely an off-ramp for the Iranian side. Baku required apology from Iran. I think this has been recently a pattern in Azerbaijani foreign policy toward its bigger neighbors who somehow disrespect Baku's interests, and Baku wants to show that there is no longer this asymmetry in bilateral relations. So it will persist on on issues, especially apology from the opposite side on the issues which is in Azerbaijani national interest. So the same happened with Russia after the downing of Azerbaijani airplane. Right now, we see a similar scenario with Iran, that Iran make apology, and so the issue is being resolved on the diplomatic level. So I think currently there is a space for moving forward and keeping everything, moving down from here. And now, let's say, the ball is in Tehran's court in that regard.
Hamid, just for the benefit of our viewers, perhaps, who are outside of the region, who are less familiar with the ties, the heritage, the links between Iran and Azerbaijan, just explain the complexity of that, if you could.
Yeah, the point is that, the biggest structural problem is that Iran views neighboring countries, especially the ones in the Gulf, which we see as a result of the attacks on the territory of those countries, and also Azerbaijan as a proxy of United States and Israel. This is a big problem. So Tehran denies agency to these countries, which in the end results with these kinds of escalation in its relation with these countries. So Azerbaijan many times declared that any third country will attack Iranian territory from its territory from Azerbaijan, and it will never let that happen. So, but Iranian side seems to be not accepting that, but Azerbaijan, because the same things happened in 2021 and 2022, Iran was conducting unprecedented military drills along Azerbaijani borders. And Azerbaijan's reaction has always been solid, and equal retaliation has always been conducted. Azerbaijan conducted its own military exercise along Iran's borders. If you remember, in 2022, there was this case, Iranian side put pontoon bridge exercising possible land-ground invasion into Azerbaijan. A few days later, Azerbaijani side, together with Turkey troops, conducted very same military exercise along its borders with Iran. So the point is that there is this, but Azerbaijan for some time compartmentalized. So the point is that yes, there are mistrust in bilateral relations, but Baku is open to cooperation and engagement with Tehran in both diplomatic and economic field. And North-South corridor connecting Russia with Iran, running through Azerbaijan, was part of that. There was this compartmentalization, but Iranian side, with this move, showed that they have crossed some red lines. And of course, Azerbaijan, as in previous years, especially events in 2021 and 2022, retaliate symmetrically. So far, it's limited to diplomacy, and the hope is that it will not go further.
We appreciate your insights, Mohammed. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, after the break, we're going to check in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. Great to have you with us this evening. Okay, staying on the topic of Iran, Iran's Revolutionary Guard said it is ready for an extended war with Israel and the United States. Next leader's election process is also underway. Touraj Shirililo has more from Tehran.
I have arrived at downtown Tehran, where the weekly Friday prayers are held, with worshippers chanting anti-US and anti-Israel slogans in condemnation of their invasion. On the 7th of the war, and in a new development, the Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, IRGC, has announced that it is fully prepared for a prolonged conflict, planning to deploy advanced weaponry not used yet in the current war. Brigadier General Ali Mohammad Naini said Iran's enemies should expect painful blows in the coming wave of attacks, and added, initiatives and new weapons not deployed on a large scale are on the way. Following the US-Israel air raids against civilian centers, Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Amir Said Iravani, has written an official letter to UN Security Council. He said that the US and Israel have deliberately targeted densely populated civilian areas and vital civilian infrastructure, which constitutes a clear violation of the Charter of the United Nations. On Thursday, the Martyrs Foundation announced the total number of civilian casualties surpassed 1,230 people, saying that 200 of them were girl students killed by U.S. attack on their school in south of Iran during the first day of war last Saturday. Meantime, member of Golestan province in Leadership Experts Council, Ayatollah Mohsen Taheri, said that in absentia voting in election of the new leader is underway and the result will be announced soon. According to official sources, former leader Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei's burial will be held in the holy city of Mashhad after a farewell ceremony in the capital Tehran, which has been delayed for security reasons. And in another major development, the Interim Leadership Council, which met for the fourth time this week to regulate the election procedure, was also delegated with leaders' constitutional powers to assign or remove military commanders and also declare war or peace. According to official sources, the decision was adopted in a bid to avoid executive and command vacuum in the wartime. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for A News at the scene of Friday prayers in Tehran.
Israel says its operation against Iran is entering a new stage. Meanwhile, strikes are continuing against Hezbollah targets in Dahia, a southern suburb of Beirut. Maria Rodriguez Abaldi brings more now.
IDF continues to give details of his operation. 80% of Iran's air defense systems are over, and 60% of Iran's ballistic missile launchers have been destroyed. As the rate of Iran's ballistic missiles fire has decreased, the Israeli military assessed that Hezbollah's attacks on Israel from Lebanon may increase. The National Security Council announcement in light of serious concerns that terrorist elements are operating with the aim of harming Israelis abroad urges Israelis overseas to maintain increased vigilance and adhere to safety precautions. According to IDF Chief of Staff, Israel is shifting to next stage. Army will intensify attacks on the Iranian government foundations and military capabilities, indicating that more surprises are coming up. Netanyahu, in a new statement, say the achievements are considerable, but there is still much to be done. Israeli military say it has begun attacking what is described as Hezbollah's infrastructure in Dahiyeh, a suburb south of Beirut, after previously urging residents to evacuate their homes ahead of the bombardment. Said Ali Hamad, responsible for managing all the Hezbollah's firepower and artillery in southern Lebanon, has been eliminated. Fears point to that country now becoming a new Gaza.
To Turkey now, and NATO has moved to strengthen ballistic missile defence posture following a missile incident involving Turkish airspace earlier this week. Well, the alliance says the decision comes amid rising regional tensions and concerns over missile activity across the Middle East. Here are the details.
NATO has placed its collective ballistic missile defense system on heightened alert after a missile launched toward Turkish airspace was intercepted earlier this week. In a statement issued late Thursday, a NATO spokesman said the alliance had enhanced its defensive posture in response to what he described as Iran's indiscriminate missile attacks across the region. The move followed the interception of a ballistic missile that was fired toward Turkey on Wednesday. According to Turkish authorities, NATO air defense units destroyed the incoming missile over the eastern Mediterranean after it was detected over Iraqi and Syrian airspace. Tehran, for its part, has denied launching any missiles toward Turkish territory, stressing its respect for Turkey's sovereignty. Despite the denial, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has said Ankara was leaving nothing to chance when it comes to protecting the country's borders and airspace. He also said that Turkey was taking all necessary precautions in close coordination with its NATO allies. Turkey has been a member of NATO since 1952 and fields the second largest standing army within the alliance after the United States. Ankara is also set to host a major NATO leaders summit later this summer. This is Adamara for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Continuing with Central Asia now, and Kazakhstan is moving forward with new oil and gas exploration projects involving international energy companies. The British energy company Shell has signed a new agreement with the country's Ministry of Energy to begin geological exploration in western Kazakhstan. Our correspondent reports now from Almaty.
A new exploration agreement between the British energy company Shell and Kazakhstan's Ministry of Energy opens a new stage of geological exploration in the country's west. The project focuses on the Zhanat-Turmus block in the Aktobe region, an area considered one of Kazakhstan's promising oil and gas basins. The exploration site covers about 1,377 square kilometers and is expected to expand geological exploratory activities in the country. Under the agreement, Shell will conduct 3D seismic surveys, collect geological data, and carry out a technical assessment of the field. The work program may also include drilling a deep exploratory well. Kazakhstan's Vice Minister of Energy Yerlan Akbarov says the project is aimed at forming a long-term hydrocarbon resource base to strengthen the country's energy security and support economic growth. The exploration contract will run until 2032, reflecting the scale and technical complexity of the project. As part of the agreement, the company will also allocate at least about $200,000 to support social and economic development in the region where the block is located. And according to the Ministry of Energy, 321 contracts for hydrocarbon exploration and production are currently active in Kazakhstan's subsoil use sector. Fariza Kalimursina, Almaty, A News.
To Afghanistan now, and a new UN report warns that thousands of families have been displaced and dozens of civilians killed following days of escalating violence along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Our very own Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
According to the United Nations, airstrikes and border clashes between Afghanistan and Pakistan have affected at least 10 provinces since late February. At least 56 civilians have been killed and 129 injured, while more than 16,000 families have been newly displaced. That adds to those still displaced by last year's earthquake, bringing the total to more than 23,000 families. Aid agencies say airstrikes have damaged health facilities and humanitarian sites, while access to some areas remains limited due to ongoing fighting. The escalation follows cross-border strikes between Afghan and Pakistani forces. Pakistan says it targeted militants linked to the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, while Afghan authorities condemned the strikes and say they responded with retaliatory attacks. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has offered to mediate as Russia and China call for de-escalation. But with fighting still continuing, aid agencies warn more people could be displaced. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Now let's go to Azerbaijan's Shardag Resort, where our team is following the Ski Mountaineering European Championship. Here's the latest from day 3 of the tournament.
Europe's top skiers are competing in Azerbaijan's northeastern winter resort Shahdagh for the third consecutive day. The ski mountaineering European Championship is heating up with ruthless battles as a fight for the podium tightens. The weather conditions are just ideal for the athletes. The temperature stands at 0 and the sky is clear. Today, athletes are competing in the individual discipline, which means a long race with multiple climbs and descents. Athletes must adjust their equipment each time to match the landscape, so they perform 5 to 10 transitions or even more depending on the course. For this, skiers carry a backpack, and by equipment transition I mean that in the steep sections of the mountains, athletes change their gear from skis to boots and start to hike. Then on the downhills, they switch back to skis again. The faster they make these changes, the better the result. Earlier, we tracked them from above using cable cars and witnessed their ascent. What we saw is that the battle is really fierce on steep hills and extremely physical. Now, I want to quickly mention yesterday's mixed relay discipline results. In the youth event, athletes from Germany secured the gold medal, while Spain and Russia took silver and bronze respectively. In the seniors event, as expected, the Swiss team snatched the gold medal, while Italy and Germany secured silver and bronze respectively. With still 2 days to go, we will be here following the latest updates from the European Championship. Narçiçek Cahangirli, Natiq Mehmedov, Aves Hacıyev, A News.
Well, that is all for Prime Time for tonight and indeed for this week. Please do join us again on Monday for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, have a great weekend.